today for our virtual program, Archaeology Works. I'm Greg Holbrook, the director of the New Smyrna Museum of History, joining you from my house today, actually. We've got, it looks like quite a few of you dropping in and joining us. The presentation today is actually being hosted in part by our partners at the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and Sarah Miller, the director of the Northeast and North Central regions of the Florida Public Archaeology Network, has joined us as our presenter today. So I'm going to go ahead and give a quick intro for her, and then I'm going to transfer control of this meeting over to her, and she can move forward with today's presentation. Sarah Miller is the regional director for the Northeast and East Central Centers for the Florida Public Archaeology Network, hosted by Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida. She received her master's degree in anthropology from East Carolina University in 2001, where she developed archaeology education programs at Tryon Place in Newbern, North Carolina. Upon graduating from ECU, Ms. Miller supervised field and lab projects with public involvement for the Kentucky Archaeological Survey, as well as reviewed compliance projects for the Kentucky Heritage Council. She currently serves on the board of directors for the Society for Historical Archaeology. She's the chair of the Society for Historical Archaeology's Heritage at Risk Committee. She's on the board of directors for the Center for Archaeological Synthesis, is the statewide coordinator for Project Archaeology, and editorial board for the Journal of Archaeology and Education. Her specialties include historical archaeology, archaeology education, site stewardship, heritage at risk, advocacy, and historic cemeteries. And I would like to ask you all to join me in clapping virtually for Sarah Miller.
Great, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm excited to be with you all today. And I would normally like to walk around the room a lot and toggle back and forth between screen and myself, but for ease of your eyes today, I'll just be sharing my slides and a couple photos of me so you can see me pop up in between. And I'm really excited to see we have got more on the line today, so please feel free when you're asking questions, and if they get into areas for New Smyrna Beach that she would speak best to, maybe she'd be willing to help answer some of those questions for me as well. But I do want to remind you there is a chat feature where you can put your questions as we go. It's difficult for me to multitask and see those at the same time I'm giving the presentation, but I will circle back to them at the end. And you were given some handouts today, so I have some Handout Alert icons that will show up on the screen if what's on the slide is part of a handout, and you can look at them now or look at them later, but I thought it might help to scaffold. If you've seen them once before, you'll know how to get back to them. Great. Well, today I'll be talking about historic ceramics in our Archaeology Works series, and these are really workshops that are done, I think, best in person and for a good chunk of the day, and can set up some different stations to practice different things. And the idea was, it's interesting the material culture that archaeologists find when they're excavating, but doing behind the scenes analysis and the work that Dot and Tracy do at the museum, it's really great to demystify some of those processes. How do we know when things date to? How do we know where they came from? And a lot of that is behind the scenes work done in the lab after. So we'll be shining a light on historic ceramics today. Here's a photo of me, just so you can get to know me a little better. Here I am excavating out at the Fountain of Youth with Kathy Deegan and her crew from University of Florida. I live in St. Augustine. I'm really excited to live here and work here, but I had a lot of catching up to do. As Greg mentioned in the introduction, I moved here from Kentucky, where our historic ceramic material culture only goes back, a couple hundred years. Having to add 500 years of historic ceramics to that knowledge, I definitely needed some help. So I was happy that Kathy Deegan taught a class on historic ceramic analysis here at Flagler College that I was able to sit in. And a lot of the photos that are used in the presentation today are from that class that I was able to hold the sherds, ask questions, lick them when Kathy wasn't looking, and get up and close and personal with them. Just a shout out for FPAN. We do education and outreach. We help local governments. We help assist the state. So today I'm kind of hitting all three of those by giving some good support for New Smyrna, one of our favorite communities in our Northeast region, talking about some of the sites that are located around the state that you can go and visit, and again, giving some education and outreach. So if you know of any teachers or students who are interested in learning more on this topic, we'd be happy to virtually work with them as we're pivoting a lot of our face-to-face programming online, such as today. I did want to give a sherd alert. I will be using this word 100 times in the next 5 minutes. So I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page and knew that a sherd is a fragment, a piece of broken ceramic, of a plate or a bowl or cup, could be a variety of different vessel types. But the main definition for sherd is that it's made out of clay. It usually has some decoration, and we're trying to identify it to tell a little bit more about the people that lived here in Florida before. So sherd, if it was a broken piece of glass, we might call it a fragment, and some of the British folks call it a shard, and those words change around a lot. But today, when I say sherd, I'm just meaning a broken piece of plate, a broken piece of pottery. And why are archaeologists so excited to study ceramics? Well, it gets into how we study sites and we excavate. We go down through layers, we go down through different features. We're really trying to get good control on where things are found so we can say how old they are or how they were used, who used them, when were they used. And as we go further down into the layers, objects should get older over time. So ceramics that preserve quite nicely compared to something made out of wood or something organic, the ceramics, the broken pieces, will stay intact and conserved in the ground for hundreds, thousands of years, depending, and are a great resource that we can then look at the other artifacts that are found in the same layer as the ceramics. Or sometimes if you find a very old ceramic in a higher up layer, like layer A, it could tell you, ooh, someone held on to that for a long time. It doesn't mean that your layer dates as old as the ceramic it's found, but it could mean someone curated it, they held on to it. And a good example of that is the china that some of us might eat off of for Thanksgiving, or other kinds of special use artifacts that get held on to over time. But in general, the further in time we go back, the deeper down we'll go, and we'll look at some analysis that will help us date some of the layers that we look at, or even some of the features, like a post hole or a fire pit or other things in the ground. So ceramics are very useful for that. If you are not the kind of person that likes icebreakers and standing up and meeting other people in the room, good news, you get a free get out of icebreaker card today, because this workshop usually starts with me passing out sherds and passing out some reference cards and having people try to match up the sherd that they have in their hand with the reference card. And on top of that, they also have a partner, so someone else who has the same kind of ceramic type they do. Things can look really confusing. You might think you have the same ceramic type because it's got the same decoration, but they could be made in very different locations, used in very different time periods, and we would know that by looking at the paste, looking at the kind of clay that the ceramic is made from. So here we are doing the icebreaker. This is up in Fernandina at the Amelia Island Museum. So we would have you all rearrange according to different chronologies or different costs or different manufacture dates, just to really hit home the point that even though these sherds you're looking at look pretty static and one piece of information, they actually have very dynamic bits of information that they contain. So as I was saying, when I moved from Kentucky, and we had about maybe 50 different historic ceramic types that we looked at pretty commonly. Here in Florida, the Florida Museum of Natural History has this beautiful digital type collection, and there are 215 ceramic types found in their collection. So you have a lot to add on to. And looking at this nice tree graphic, you can see the root of things made out of clay, and then how they start to break down into what the different clay was used for the ceramics, what different kind of decoration types, what different vessel forms, and that helps us identify the sherd even further. For the adults in the room, I like to make an analogy to wine descriptions and this deductive tasting format, how you can go by color, you can go by aroma, but some people can get very specific to the exact river valley some of the wine comes from. So just as this deductive process happens for sommeliers who are typing wine, same thing happens for archaeologists when we're presented with a sherd, and a lot of people from the public will want to know, hey, I found this in my yard, what is it? This is the process that we'll go through, is trying to deduce what type it is based on different traits that we have put together and given a name to make them bundled a little easier to manage. Handout alert. You have two handouts. One is a TPQ timesheet by George Miller that has some historic ceramic type descriptions. And then also from Kathy Deegan's book, I have this table 2 that looks at those found in the Spanish colonies. And this is a page that wasn't familiar to me living in Kentucky or other English settlements further north from here. But here in Florida, they become very important. And again, it adds great diversity to the materials that we're looking at for ceramics. So what does that deductive process look like for an archaeologist? We're going to play with these a little bit looking at the slides, but Kathy Deegan would want me to tell you, paste is prime. Figuring out what kind of clay, what kind of firing process was used will tell you the most information when you're trying to identify a ceramic. And you won't believe me maybe at first. What I thought was decoration matters. It's so visual, it pops out, it's right before your eyes and you can describe it and share pictures of it and people say, oh, that looks just like what I have. But really there's a lot of mimicry happening, a lot of imitation, a lot of things change over time, and that paste is very important for figuring out what kind of ceramic type you have. And then I added vessel form in there because that's also another important analysis we go through, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But focusing in on paste. I'm going to talk about 4 main paste types today, and I tried to put little numbers at the top to visually guide you through, because normally I could hand these out to you. You could look at them, you could do some observation and inference, holding the sherds and seeing how they differ. And this is just a challenging format for all, but I wanted you to get a little experience with what the different paste types look like. So we have coarse earthenwares, which are the oldest. We have stonewares, refined earthenwares we're going to review, and porcelain. So I'm going to lead you through some of the traits, but you'll see up above, you can see where the paste is important. And you can't always see the paste looking at the vessels that you see down below, like that coarse earthenware mug. You know, you can't really crack in and see the side of it, but what coarse earthenware looks like from the paste. Same with stoneware. You can see that nice crock that in my hand I'm holding what the side view looks like for the paste. If you're sending a picture to an archaeologist and you want them to help you identify your sherd, make sure to include one of these side images. Because again, looking at the refined earthenware and the transferware plate, the third blue and white image you see, that's actually not very useful for an archaeologist because I can tell you the decoration type, but I want to get a closer look at that paste, what the clay looks like that it's made out of. So zeroing in on a few specifics. Coarse earthenwares, they're still made today, but they're our oldest. Some of the first ceramics found in the world are made out of coarse earthenware. Terracotta. This means that they're low fired clay at about 800, 900 degrees, and they're found everywhere on the planet. So most of human history has used coarse earthenwares. You can find them everywhere. If you were looking at it, it would appear grainy and porous and hard and fired, but a little trick sometimes we use, not all archaeologists would advocate for this. I lick them. I will stick them to my tongue just to see how porous the paste is. And a coarse earthenware will definitely stick to your tongue because it's the air bubbles in the clay that's been fired that is still there that help it adhere to your tongue. A lot of them are untreated, can be unglazed. Some are glazed, some have punctates and incising, like the one I'm holding has kind of these circular punctate marks found on the surface. They can be painted, they can have lead glazing, they can have slips. So again, you don't want to just go off decoration types, because other decoration types you'll find on other types of paste. But these are pretty distinctive when you look at the size of them and can be pretty chunky. So all the ones you're looking at here on the screen, even though they have really different surface treatments, they are all coarse earthenware. Some standouts I wanted to talk about: Guadalajara on the left. I forgot to look up the term, but there's some discussion that people would eat the paste of the ceramic for minerals. For other reasons, there's a special word for that, but that's one you can kind of find nibble marks on every now and then. Not too common, but there's some historic references, that's what it was used for. I have here some Delft, and that one, the glaze didn't adhere very well to the sherd, to the paste, so you can find it spalled and popped off and just little traces of shiny bits. But that'll give you a clue, like, ooh, this is a coarse earthenware sherd. I'm going to try and play a video. Look, I'm very brave. This is a orange micaceous sherd, and it would glimmer. Little bits of mica would catch your eye as you turn it. And so that's a very old Florida Spanish originated ceramic type that we have here. And another standout, this is a Pensacola Banded. It's a coarse earthenware that is also a Majolica. And the ones we know of in Florida come from this one feature in the lower right-hand corner. So this is a feature that was found while excavating at the site in Pensacola. So all that we know about the site comes down to this one feature found in Pensacola. And if you know Brenda Swan, she lives locally here in town in St. Augustine. But she helped excavate that feature. So showing her the sherd with the feature puts them together nicely for dating the site and for trying to tell the best story you can about that one pit feature. Majolica is our coarse earthenware. They're one of my favorites, so we'll also be talking about Majolicas later in the decoration. But I just want to show you the variety and how you could be tricked, because even the background glaze can change from very bright white to kind of a bluish cast. And all of these are coarse earthenwares. So that's a huge hint if you're trying to identify a sherd, to look at the side and see what it's made out of. Then we also have stoneware. This should be a 2, but stonewares are used in the late medieval times when they first appeared. Some of them are salt glaze, so if you can shine a light on them, get a little reflection, you'll notice they have an orange peel texture, and that's from salt that was thrown into the kiln at the last minute that gives it that very, very particular texture. It's a little scratchy. Not all are salt glazed, but many stonewares are salt glazed. They can have different kind of surface treatments, like some of the other ones, and it's at a lower firing temperature, higher than some of the other. What I'm trying to say is if you lick it, it will not stick to your tongue. There are no porous air bubbles. It will not stick to your tongue, and that's because of the firing temperature is higher than the coarse earthenwares. Porcelain is another paste type that we'll be looking at. Porcelain, the origin is in Asia. Around 1300 to 1450 centigrade is the temperature at which porcelain is fired. So it's very close to glass, that high temperature. A white kaolin clay was used for the paste, and they can be lead glazed. They can look really the same whether they're lead glazed or not. Has a very shiny, clear surface. And then refined earthenwares. So these are introduced in the 1790s. They have higher temperatures up to 1300 degrees, but not as high as porcelain. They are thinner, they are hardier. Your tongue does not stick as much to this, but they'll stick a little bit because they're refined. They are still the earthenware, but not as much as a coarse earthenware. And they usually have a little lighter in color. A majority of what the public comes to us when they find a sherd are these. They are refined earthenwares, and you'll find a lot in your cabinets at home, and it's still used today. It's still pretty common. So you have lots of decorations and surface treatments that are found in the other types as well. But if they're looking pretty white and hardish and that consistency of thickness, chances are you've got a good refined earthenware that was mass produced and can be found potentially all over the world in different places because of the heavy shipping. So we're going to move from talking about paste, which is maybe not as flashy as the decoration, but the paste is so important for doing that deductive process for identifying what a sherd is. But the decoration is really, speaks to the artist side that a lot of us have, or what are the colors, what are the images that are used, what are the motifs that get recreated, and a lot of those have interesting cultural origins or are used and copied. So some of the decoration surface treatments I was going to share with you are these slipped. These are another layer of clay that is added to the surface of the ceramic and fired. So it looks like it's painted, but it's actually another layer of clay that's been added on there. So a lot of the English slipwares we have in St. Augustine are found with this yellow background and the brown runny slip that's been made over. Some are combed, some are what's called joggled, where you just shake that clay around when it's still wet and then fire it, and can have really swirly, fun appearances. A transfer print is made by carving into a plate a decoration, then transferring, like a copper plate, and then transferring that print, transferring the ink over onto the ceramic. And it looks almost like a coffee filter process where you etch in the design on the copper plate, press in the filter, transfer it over to your ceramic, and then fire it up. So it can have very intricate fine lines and has a pretty distinct look versus hand painted, which can be a little more flowy, a little more watery, a little more, as it suggests, hand painted rather than etched and carved in. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the edge treatments, and that we find a lot in Florida and all over, and then some unique ones that are sponged or engine turned are another favorite, and those techniques are pretty interesting. It's almost akin to, in my mind, of leather carving, of how you carve out the different sections that later take up some color with the glazing and get a lot of nice variety of those treatments. So just to show you a few examples, this is a decoration type hand-painted San Luis polychrome, and it can trick you a bit. So on the right, you'll see all the different kinds of alternatives of San Luis polychrome. We have these large plates that were found in St. Augustine, but we wanted to look at the variety or how sherds can get misidentified. So even up in the right-hand picture, you can see a yellow sherd popping out. What's the yellow doing in what looks to be a pretty green and black focused decoration style? But again, it's got the paste type that was from clay taken in Mexico and fired and brought here and traded. The other thing I want to point out about the hand painting, you can see the green watery flowers or trumpets, and then those black fine lines. Those black fine lines are also hand painted, and it was a different sector of artists who was used to paint the black lines versus the green lines. So one question I like to pose people is, which do you think was paid more as the trade artist for this skill? And the answer is those who painted the fine black lines were paid more than those who applied the green, looser painted. And you can see why the precision matters. If you do some measurements, we did measurements on the plates that you see on the left. We measured the single line on the outside of the marley. We measured the 2 lines found further in on the rim, and then this is kind of like a bowl, and those 3 lines that are painted on the inside, they are very precise down to exact diameters of measurements. So we took some of those just to see how precise are they, and turns out they're pretty precise. So that matches up with why they might be paid higher for their skills. Another edge treatment we find are shell-edged earthenwares, and just to show you a little of the variety that we see on the edge, that even the impressed lines can get broken in. Like, you could just generally call this shell-edged earthenware, but even within that identification are a lot of other specifics of whether they're curved or scalloped or patterned, or some are just painted on the edge and not even impressed where you can feel them. So finding plates such as this and then being able to look at their dates even further can come in really handy when you're looking to tightly date some of your sites or some of your features. And then just a comment on vessel forms, because even what it's made out of and how it's decorated, another thing we need to find out are how many different kinds of vessels are used. You may find like a hand-painted sherd that looks like you have the whole vessel, but come to find out, when you start looking at the rims, start looking at the handles, start looking at the different shapes, you have either a set using the same decoration, or one, you could have, you know, from 5 to 500 different vessels, and you wouldn't know if they came from a single vessel or multiple vessels unless you really took a good look at the measurements of, are they a 9-inch plate? Are they a smaller bowl? Are they an egg cup? Are they a salt dish? You know, just all the variety things can come in that can flesh out, okay, we don't just have one ceramic that we're finding matched sets, or things that either shift and change over time or can be found at other sites for comparison. But that vessel information can be really important to knowing how many vessels you have, what the count is. Maybe I'm not explaining this well, but take one of those plates. You can break it on the ground and you can have 2 pieces that are from one vessel. You could break the same plate and end up with 100 different pieces that is all one vessel. But when you start looking to see different vessels that are represented, you know, whether they're pitcher, cup, or saucer, all those different words, you could find out, wait a second, we don't have 1 or 2, we have 20, we have 30, we have 500 different vessels. So how we get to some of that in the lab and what we can practice at a time we can all meet together is measuring the diameter of the rims, either the rims of the bowl or with the outside part of a cup that you would sip on, or even the foot, the base, the foot on the base. You can look to see what those measure out to. So really important for prehistoric ceramics, but also for historic ceramics and matching up with a lot of shipping information. You can see this other tool we use on the right to kind of measure the curve of the side, and that can help you if you're looking at a pitcher or a bowl, plate, different vessel sizes. It might be hard if you're looking at small broken pieces, but when you can see the degree and the curvature, it can help you flesh out a little more of how many different vessels you're looking at. And then really good activity a lot of us have had to do is mending down at the bottom. You can put broken pieces into either rice or sand and give them a little freedom to adhere with some conservation quality glue, or even just taping them, try and mend them together. This is important. Here's a good example. This is at Henry Clay's estate in Lexington, Kentucky. We excavated there for about 5 years and found millions of artifacts in Henry Clay's privy. So going from these million broken pieces of pottery to getting to organizing them by type and decoration to start doing a full-on vessel analysis, and then your numbers really come down a bit and can tell you a lot more about the households that were using these objects. What we would normally do right now is give you a little break to stand up and walk around, and instead we're pivoting to online format. But I wanted to talk through the ceramic stations that we'd have you go through, because it's just another way of expressing why the ceramics are important to archaeologists and what happens after the artifacts are taken from the field back to the lab. What are some of the things we might do to try and further understand? So you're looking at some repainting, maybe some experimental archaeology of how to reproduce some of the decorations you see. The mending activity we talked a little bit about, but we would do some mending at substation. We would do this vessel analysis you can see in square 3, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then 4th is really difficult to do in a virtual format, but I gave you one of the handouts to try and play with that a little bit, is looking at how you can date a site or a layer or a specific feature by doing a mean ceramic date for that. And let's navigate ahead and see how we go with these stations. So station 1 is pretty easy, and you have this in a handout, just a circle really, but we do have people, whether they're painting actual blank vessels, try and draw inspiration from either some Majolica samples or others used in different times, just to try their hand at those precise lines, the different techniques that you would use to hand apply paint or other ways to decorate ceramics. So I included these handouts, so if anyone wants to send me a drawing, I would be so happy to receive it and help post it online, just to show a lot of what we see in Florida ceramics, I think, are a great point of inspiration for a whole variety of artistic activities today. So, and you get to understand a little bit more what they were trying to visually replicate. Some of them in the lower left-hand corner, for example, San Luis polychrome was really inspired by a lot of the lacing that was happening in Mexico at that time. So you can see some similar loops and lines, and try and experiment with that, versus try our precise black line versus looser watery or green splotching for the San Luis polychrome. And I want to say sponging, I always think is more recent, but we have a Santa Elena pottery that looks pretty well sponged to me. So trying to replicate that blue sponging, and that's a nice 16th century ceramic. For trying out some mending, you can blow up and print some of the handout sheets I sent and cut them up. We will do this for festivals or at our workshop, and even laminate some of the pieces. It's much easier to put them together when you have the whole picture of what they're supposed to look like, but that mending can be a really fun challenge, and some people really like it and some do not. So that's another good station to try. This is more complicated for you to try at home, but you have a handout to think about these edge patterns. We had donated to us this bag of these shell edge rims, and when you first look at it, you think it could be one, maybe not one vessel, but one of the same type of vessel, until you start really looking at those different lines, and then we try and see what groups will come up with a minimum number of vessels. What's the minimum number of plates that are represented in this huge bag of sherds? And I think there's like 90 sherds, and there ends up being like a number of 18 minimum. Now there could be more than 18, but that's your minimum number. Helps you get down to not counting everything just by quantity, but really evaluating the volume of the different forms you have. And then mean ceramic date, I would say, is pretty difficult for us to do unless we gave a whole day to it to figure it out, which I'm up for. If anybody else wants to circle back and try, is we need to identify the sherd, so do that deductive task of figuring out what ceramic type you have, and then looking at the known ranges of manufacture. And a lot of this is from catalogs or from housing inventories. We have a median date. So multiplying the amount of sherds by that medium date and dividing by the overall number, you can come up with these dates that will tell you roughly this layer dates to 1820, or this post hole was put in approximately 1830. And it can be a little loose and move around a little bit because they're based on averages, but we've seen it with layers that you should get an earlier date the deeper down you go in your layers, and can help you with what's a replacement post, what was a moving out activity, rapidly deposited versus something like a backyard sheet midden that took a long time to build up that one single layer. So the final part of our talk today, before we get to a few questions in just a minute, I just wanted to highlight that we're talking some generalities and ceramics found all over the world, and different decoration types you might see. I wanted to focus in on kind of moments where it really made a difference what the sherd was in helping us put together a chronology of Florida past. So olive jars are really fascinating, and you can have early, middle, and late. So in the photo you're hopefully seeing, you can see the different rim types of the different early on the left, middle in the middle, and late on the far right, to see when in time your olive jars may date to. So even if you identify something as olive jar, it can really depend in time by things like how thick the paste is, what the color is, how it was manufactured, and get some variety of that. But the very earliest sherds we would have from Spanish occupation are the olive jars. And when we're looking for those very early contact sites in Florida, you really want to find some prehistoric pottery mixed in with olive jars to help you identify that you have one of the earliest sites. But word of caution, olive jars were used, especially the later, longer. So it doesn't mean you have necessarily the earliest site. You have to go and do the further vessel analysis. Majolicas are a favorite, and a lot of them get the names from places they were first found. So this is a Isabella polychrome Majolica sherd, and the name comes from the Isabella site, discovered and studied by Kathy Deegan in Haiti. So here's a picture of Isabella, the queen in Spain, that's at the Fountain of Youth, and the ceramic type gets named after a site named after her in Haiti. And you can see on my nails, I have taken the decoration of the Isabella polychrome that is blue and purple and have these lines or these nice Arabic characters on the rim, and kind of puts together the old and the new with the Fountain of Youth manicure picture. And most Majolicas too, they have a name from where they were first identified and located that might not be where they were made. This is another sherd, the Bove sherd. It's a French ceramic found in Jacksonville area. It was discovered by a citizen, I'm going to say in the 60s, donated to the museum, and it wasn't until recently they went back to look through and find the sherd. Why it's important? Because we don't know where Fort Caroline, where the French landed, specifically in Jacksonville. So this sherd, found by a member of the public and turned in, is really the first X marks the spot of where the proximity of Fort Caroline is and how they know they're roughly in the right spot. This sherd, it's one sherd. You can see the interior and exterior, but was taken to France to be confirmed and identified as a Bove sherd. So I've got to see it in person and look at it, and it's in the housed by the Florida Museum of Natural History. But it's one of those good examples of how a single sherd can really help with interpreting an entire site. We also have later French ceramics and faience that have really nice decorative rims, and they're tin glazed ceramic like the Majolicas. But these are much later in time. So even if somebody came at us with one of these rims saying, this could be part of Fort Caroline, we'd say no. If you look at the paste and you look at the decoration, it dates 100 to 200 years later, depending. Stoneware is another good example of Florida sherds that make a difference. Colonialware, in this case, will mean things made in a different paste type, but with a different cultural vessel form. For example, we have this sherd. This is a Gonzalez sherd found in St. Augustine, and it's got etched on the back, Gonzalez, the name, and the front. To archaeologists, this would look very much like a prehistoric stamped sherd, but it has the Spanish name written into the back. And we know that downtown St. Augustine, a lot of the ceramics being made by particularly the women, Native American women in town, they were using the prehistoric technology of the clay and the firing, but making them in the shape of Spanish vessels. What really hits home this example is this is a pitcher, so very much identified as a European Spanish colonial vessel type, but it's made out of prehistoric paste, out of the prehistoric kind of clays and techniques made to use their pottery. So it kind of shows this coming together, this synchronization of different cultures. Slipware, I think I'll skip over this because I already told you they do some neat combing and joggling, and different treatment types can be very old. And there are times when slipware should be illegal in St. Augustine, but shows up. So we know there's some contraband trading going on. The shell edge we talked a little bit about, and I find where it's interesting, you don't find as much of it as in New Smyrna when we went down to visit Dot and Roger once, since the British colony collapsed there early. You don't find it as ubiquitous as you do in other places. And maybe Dot can explain that better in the question mark. Mocha wares, these are another favorite type of mine. They get this dendritic mocha, these things that look like trees across the bands of the bowl. That is an ingredient of tobacco and horse urine that is mixed together. So when you drop the dot onto the surface, it will automatically do that kind of branching out technique. So that's another good one to lick and then tell the kids what they are looking at is tobacco and horse urine, and how they came up with that, I have no idea, but has a special attributes. Porcelain's an interesting case. We find a lot more porcelain because it's used industrial porcelain. It's the same kind of firing that's very close to glass, but it's used in toilets. It's used in a whole bunch of other different furniture and architectural features. So it can be hard to believe you're looking at the same paste type as a really fine teacup or some of the oldest plates that we have here in town, but they're actually the same paste type. And then a last note, WREs, there are some archaeologists that started lumping together these white refined earthenware. So you would have pearlware, whiteware, ironstone, and lumped together, because they can be sometimes hard to identify the different paste types. But for us in Florida and other parts of the US, it's so important to get down to early 18th century, late 19th century. The different white refined earthenwares you're finding can really help you separate that out, separate your chronology, and know who was using the site or how the site changed over time. So just to wrap it up, if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend Kathy Deegan's book, Artifacts of Spanish Colonies of Florida and the Caribbean. And Volume 1 is specifically deals with ceramics, so glassware and beads, but a lot of the images and sherds that we know, some of the earliest in Florida, you can find in that volume. Ceramics in America, this is a journal that is published every year, and I couldn't fit all the thumbnails because you couldn't see the covers very well, but they are gorgeous, stunning, and not only do they show you the examples of ceramics used, they show you the techniques, like the techniques of engine turning or slipwares or the transfer print. They have really nice images that can talk more about the process of how the decorations that we see, or the kilns. We track down a lot of the early kilns, so just a really beautiful way to collect more information on ceramics. And then again, that Florida Museum of Natural History, their digital type collection, they have the 215 types and a lot of variants. So I'll take questions in a second if you guys want to type some in, but I'm hoping at the very least you see how dynamic historic artifacts are, how unique Florida historic ceramics are, and find inspiration in their color palettes and in their designs or other things in your life today. Here's my Halloween costume based on Apo Polychrome, a Majolica. I do the manicures partially as a way just to further understand how those different decorations are done and applied, and matching the color, they get very specific. So engage with the ceramics in other ways in your life and help bring the past alive in your own time. You can feel free to email me at fmiller@flagler.edu if you have other questions. And even though you got a Get Out of Icebreaker free card this time, hopefully we can meet again at the museum and do the full workshop.